year of migration across the Mediterranean comes to an end. The newcomers are arriving as Europe shifts further to the right on immigration. Asad Beg looks now back at immigration to Europe in the year 2018.
They travelled over 3,000 kilometres across the Mediterranean Sea. The Spanish charity Proactivia Open Arms rescued them off the coast of Libya on December 21st, but they were refused entry by several European countries, including Malta and Italy. They spent Christmas at sea, until finally Spain agreed to accept the 308 mainly African migrants.
They have only been on high seas for a week, but many of them have been travelling for months. The most serious cases were evacuated by helicopter immediately by Spanish Sea Rescue. We can expect a lot of people, a lot of children, a lot of girls, a lot of adults arriving with many complications and a lot of trauma.
In 2018, Europe tightened its borders as refugees and migrants sought sanctuary there by the thousands. Immigration is an issue that's contributed to the growth of right-wing parties, nowhere more so than in Italy, where the anti-immigrant Lega party secured ministerial positions for the first time. In August, Italy had a standoff with the EU when it refused to let a rescue boat carrying migrants dock.
I reiterate that Italy has welcomed over 700,000 immigrants who have disembarked in the last few years. But that's enough now. Our ports are closed, our hearts are open to help these youngsters not to run away from their countries. Italy can't continue to be the refugee camp of Europe.
The number of migrants entering Europe from Africa have dropped in the last year, but there are many who are still willing to risk everything to seek out a better life. The UN Refugee Agency says nearly 120,000 refugees and migrants crossed the Mediterranean Sea in 2018 to reach Europe. More than 2,200 of them were killed or went missing. Most were men. They made up nearly 65% of migrants, while 15% were women and more than 20% were children. Some political parties and governments are trying to turn people away from Europe. But in a world with a massive gap between rich and poor nations, there will always be people who want to reach the shores of a more prosperous Europe. Asad Beg, TRT World.
Right, let's speak to Sharon Walia. Sharon is a documentary filmmaker. She joins us from Nottingham here in the UK. Sharon, thank you for joining us. Your film is called The Movement. It follows everyday people rescuing refugees who are trying to come into Europe. When you meet these refugees, do you see what the governments claim is a distinction that they like to make when considering who to allow into their country? They talk about economic migrants versus real refugees who are fleeing war, famine, oppression, whatever it may be. Do you see that distinction when you meet these refugees?
Yes, I do. And I think it's firstly important to say that economic migrants and people fleeing for economic reasons or climate change reasons aren't worthy. Their claims are valid too. But I was filming off the coast of Libya twice last year, and the majority of people I met were from places like Eritrea, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. And these are really, really desperate people. We did meet some economic migrants. There's economic migrants from places like Nigeria. There was women who have had to flee Nigeria. They are classed as economic migrants, but they come to seek asylum also. So I think putting people into these groups isn't helpful and actually detracts us from the real story, that these are people suffering and have gone on really long journeys to get away from wherever it is they're running from.
And you've also looked at the other side in terms of officials in those countries where these migrants are trying to reach. What do you make of the argument, for example, Italy says that it can't deal economically with the number of undocumented people who are living in the country? There are about 600,000 of them in Italy. That's about 1% of Italy's population.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a realist when I look at this, and I have filmed both sides. And Italy, I do agree that it's unfair for Italy. Italy and Greece are the two biggest countries that take on the largest numbers of migrants and refugees. But people will try and seek refuge when when we have these problems that are going on all around the world, people do have a right to claim asylum. Now, they're not all going to stay in Italy. There's a Dublin agreement, which means that if people are fingerprinted in Italy and then move around Europe, that they will be sent back to Italy. Now, I don't think this is fair. It doesn't apply to children, and it shouldn't apply to adults. But we must remember, not everyone is going to stay in Italy. People do disperse all over Europe. And Matteo Salvini's stance at the moment is I mean, I personally think it's completely immoral. I mean, we saw Spain has finally let the Proactiva arms ship dock up, and they've been at sea for what, 7 days over Christmas, and we had people on the boat who were starving. We had mothers about to give birth, and Matteo Salvini's response is to tweet to the ship and show a picture of his lunch and saying, well, I'm full, I'm not starving. I mean, is this someone that we really want in charge of Italy's immigration policy?
Sharon, look, just finally, because we're running out of time, you've worked with refugees for 12 years. If you could be brief, and it's really unfair to ask you this, what about possible solutions?
Well, the last part of my documentary is called A Collective Solution, and I put this to the main characters, and it's been something I've been looking into. And I will be brief, and one of the main things we can do is take money, so European money that at the moment is funding the Libyan Coast Guard to take refugee ships that are in the middle of the sea on these unworthy boats back to Libya. Instead of funding the Libyan Coast Guard, we could set up asylum reception centres. We could set up centres in Libya, all around in different African countries, so people don't have to make these journeys in the first place. When we make people go on these boats, it's just a tragedy of what is happening at the moment, and shutting the ports and shutting Italy's port, Malta's port, it's not dealing with the situation, it's just ignoring the situation. And as that report just showed, that even arrival, the numbers of people arriving are down, deaths are still on the up. It's been more than 2,000 people have died this year. So people are still making this journey. Shutting the ports is not the solution.
Sharon, really appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed. That's Sharon Walia, the documentary filmmaker whose film is called The Movement, following everyday people who have been saving refugees trying to reach Europe.